Alors, bonjour tout le monde. C'est avec un très grand plaisir que je déclare l'ouverture de ce symposium qui s'intitule « 10 ans de pédagogie inclusive, un parcours pour bâtir l'avenir ». Malgré cette période particulière de la dernière année, le comité organisateur du symposium, composé de membres de l'équipe du CRISPESH et des 3 cofondatrices de la communauté de pratique du UDL à Dawson, la CEA à Dawson, a réussi à nous proposer un programme plus qu'intéressant, plusieurs activités qui seront riches en contenu et en émotions, j'en suis sûr. Ce symposium fait partie des activités pour souligner et célébrer les 10 ans du CRISPESH et de sa recherche appliquée en inclusion des personnes en situation de handicap. Sans plus tarder, je cède la parole à Catherine Soleil, Laure Galipeau et Effie Kontantinopoulos pour le mot d'ouverture. Merci.
Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes. On est très heureuse de vous accueillir dans ce symposium. Bienvenue. Micro, Effie.
My apologies. Good morning to all. Welcome to our virtual symposium, 10 years of inclusive pedagogy in Quebec.
Alors, nous sommes très heureuses de vous accueillir en ce printemps de déconfinement avec la victoire des Canadiens en plus. Et on vous remercie de vous joindre à nous, présentateurs, présentatrices, participants, participantes. Sans vous, ce symposium n'aurait pas eu lieu, évidemment. Ça va être un échange, ça va être un lieu d'échange, de rencontres et de réseautage sur un sujet qui nous passionne tous et qui nous rassemble, c'est la pédagogie inclusive au postsecondaire.
Prenons tout d'abord quelques minutes pour nous présenter. Catherine Soleil qui vient de parler, Effie Kontantinopoulos et moi-même, Laure Galipeau. Alors nous sommes, Catherine et moi, 2 enseignantes de français langue seconde au collège Dawson et Effie, une conseillère pédagogique des services adaptés, toujours du collège Dawson. Nous nous sommes rencontrés, en fait, voilà maintenant 10 ans, dans le cadre d'un projet pilote pour mener une réflexion justement sur l'inclusion des étudiants de la population émergente, qu'on appelait population émergente à l'époque. Nous avons travaillé de concert pendant toutes ces années en recherche à réfléchir sur notre pédagogie à partir du modèle de la conception universelle de l'apprentissage.
So just to summarize a little bit, 10 years ago, when I began working at Dawson, my role was twofold. One was to provide individual support to students with difficulties acquiring French as a second language, and the other was to collaborate with Catherine and Laure. And our aim was to bring the understanding of potential learning barriers, as well as the pedagogical approaches applied on an individual basis into the classroom, where we could reach a number of students. The UDL paradigm provided us with the structure to achieve this objective, thus creating an inclusive learning space for all.
Et donc, il y a 6 ans, ensemble encore, nous avons créé une communauté de pratique, UDL à Dawson, CEA à Dawson, pour permettre de diffuser le dit modèle et travailler sur des pratiques pédagogiques inclusives avec des collègues d'autres disciplines. Et parallèlement, pendant ces mêmes 10 années, la pédagogie inclusive s'est également développée avec des entreprises comme le projet CUA Interordre du CRISPESH, dont Paul Turcotte et Stéphanie Tremblay, notre conférencière de clôture, ont été les fiers mandataires. Alors, d'autres projets ont aussi vu le jour dans les 4 dernières années, ce qui a permis d'élargir la réflexion, toujours centrée sur l'étudiant et sur l'inclusion. Effie? Mon micro, Effie.
My apologies. Our affiliation with CRISPESH is an organic one, a relationship that stems from the beginning of our reflection on inclusion. As a leader in inclusion, CRISPESH has offered CVM and Dawson, as well as many other organizations and institutions across the province, the support and the resources that were necessary to fuel our quests. The idea of a symposium began with a discussion with Roch Ducharme around the table, coming to the realization that many initiatives had taken place across the province, but that there was no hub to gather and share this information amongst colleagues in the network.
Et voilà, le rêve se réalise, nous y sommes. Ça n'aurait pas eu lieu sans le travail, comme disait Roch, du comité organisateur. Alors, on doit rendre hommage à notre chef à tous et à tous, Pauline Claude, qui a mené d'une main de maître ce symposium et qui a mis en place toute l'équipe. Émilie Robert aussi, qui est directrice de recherche au CRISPESH. Paul Turcotte, notre collègue du CVM, qui est chercheur aussi, et Roch Ducharme, et mes deux collègues, évidemment, Effie et Laure. Nous souhaitons donc que ce symposium soit pour tous et pour toutes un lieu d'échange, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, de partage, de réseautage et surtout de découverte. Nous allons aborder la CUA ou la UDL ou la pédagogie inclusive sous différents angles, grâce à des communications, des présentations et des panélistes. Et nous aurons aussi plusieurs experts, donc des États-Unis avec Katie, du Québec évidemment, de l'Irlande, de la Belgique et aussi de la Nouvelle-Zélande. La voix aussi des étudiants en situation de handicap sera entendue. Ils vont nous partager leur parcours au postsecondaire. Et le programme est très riche donc, et très varié. Donc, j'espère que vous aurez toute la possibilité d'aller prendre des petites choses qui vous intéressent. Toutes les séances sont enregistrées et vous aurez accès pendant 6 mois à ces séances-là.
The symposium allows us to gather all of our reflections and experiences in the last 10 years of inclusive pedagogy and helps us as stakeholders in inclusive pedagogy within higher education to nourish and build the future of inclusion, giving us the momentum to tackle this inspiring endeavor. Join us at the collaborative workshop on June 3rd at 11 a.m. Bring your vision, inspired by what you have discovered, and share with us what you wish to explore and reflect upon. Let's dare to dream.
Osons rêver. Donc maintenant, on va laisser la place à notre conférencière d'ouverture que nous sommes très honorés d'accueillir. Katie Novak, conseillère en éducation de renommée internationale, auteure, professeure à l'Université de Pennsylvanie et à la tête de Novak Education, dont la mission est de lever les barrières, d'offrir une formation continue et spécialisée. Avec 19 ans d'expérience en enseignement et en administration, un doctorat en éducation, 10 livres à son actif, Katie Novak conçoit et donne des ateliers axés sur l'implantation des pratiques inclusives, la conception universelle de l'apprentissage, les systèmes de soutien à plusieurs niveaux et le leadership inclusif. Ses contributions et collaborations ont eu un impact sur les éducateurs du monde entier en posant les bases d'un cadre éducatif fondamental pour la réussite étudiante. Donc, son questionnement est toujours en évolution et est nourri par les enjeux contemporains liés à l'inclusion. Donc, nous sommes très honorés d'accueillir Dr. Katie Novak.
We are truly honored to welcome Dr. Katie Novak, our keynote speaker.
Katie, if you will allow me, excuse me, Katie. I forgot to mention one thing when I talk about the services that we were provided. So I talk about the the simultaneous interpretation, but you also have the closed captioning. So if you want to activate the closed captioning, just click on the CC button on the top of your Zoom window. So they should be activated by now, so you can follow the subtitles in French. So if you want to follow the subtitle in French, you just have to click on the CC button. But if you want to follow the transcription, the closed captioning in English, you have to click on the link that is being posted on the chat right now. So that's all what I wanted to add. I'm giving you Katie Novak, and we are really eager to hear you, Katie.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. I am Katie Novak. I am here with my colleague, DJ Swift, who is a professional DJ. And if you have never been to a virtual meeting with a professional DJ, I don't think you're ever going to go back. It is so wonderful. So if it would be possible to unmute DJ Swift, then we can enjoy learning and some music together this morning. We want to make sure that you hear the music you love this morning. So if you have a favorite song, please let us know in the chat box. DJ Swift will see that, and hopefully we'll be able to play that for you. Now, here in the United States, we have done a lot of work on inclusive pedagogy and trying to ensure equitable pathways for every learner to be successful. And I like to think of this work as balancing on a stool. When I was in high school, we used to sit in my parents' kitchen, and I would sit on a stool, and I would always be rocking back and forth on my stool. And my mom would say, "You're going to fall off and you're going to crack your head." And the reason she said that is that the most stable foundation is to have all of the legs of the stool firmly planted on the ground. And when I think about what we can do in our organizations to meet the needs of all of our learners, I like to think about 3 different legs. The first is our belief systems. Do we truly believe that all learners are capable of meeting our course objectives? We have to recognize our own bias. We have to recognize the importance of asset-based belief system and believing that all students can and will learn when we get the conditions right. And we also have to believe as instructors that we are capable of meeting the needs of all learners. So we have to address the belief systems of a practitioner who believes in universal design for learning. We also have to build a skill set to meet the needs of all learners. We cannot teach in a one-size-fits-all way if we want all of our learners to be successful. But we also want to make sure that we don't just have these random acts of improvement. We want to make sure that the entire university, that the entire college ensures that all students' needs are being met. And this requires us to think more systemically about how we create a system that ensures that we're meeting the needs of all learners. So that is what we're going to talk about this morning. What is the belief system of an inclusive practitioner? What is the skill set that we need to build? And how can we begin to think about what are some of the barriers on a system level so that we can truly meet the needs of all of our learners? So as we dive into this work, I want to talk about the opportunities that we have to include all learners in every single classroom. This is an analogy that a friend of mine uses, and he talks about a castle. Imagine this big castle and no one can get in. And there's locks on all the doors, there's water surrounding the castle, maybe there's even dragons that are guarding the castle. And there are so many people on the outside who are fighting to get inside. And we always talk about how do we get in? How do we allow all learners to get into these classrooms and have access to our course objectives? And when we think about a castle, we think about how hard people work to make sure that nobody can get in. And yet there is someone who holds the key. The instructor holds the key and can say, I will provide you with what you need to be successful. So I want you to think for a moment about your own practice. And what is a practice or a procedure where you hold the key and you can let more students in? So for example, right now, the conference organizers are allowing all of you to come in by providing both English and French translation. And if we only provided this in one language, we would be excluding people who did not speak that language. So by allowing everyone to come in saying, we'll provide you with the language you need, someone made that decision and they held the key to allowing all of us to be here together. So I'm going to put on a timer for 1 minute. And in this 1 minute, it's an opportunity for you to either reflect on this question or to share either in writing in a notebook or by putting it in the chat box in either English or French. And DJ Swift will play some music here for a minute. But if that music is distracting to you, you have the option to press mute so you don't have to hear it. And you will know the music is coming back on because that timer is going to only last for a minute. And when it's over, we will advance to the next slide. This is also an opportunity for you to ask any questions. If there's any questions that have come up for you, let us know in the question and answer feature, and I can answer those after this minute as well. So again, reflect on what is a practice that you use where you know that you're inviting and allowing more students in by creating that pathway. Swift, are you ready? Okay, so we've started off and we're reflecting that when we believe that all students can learn, we hold the key, we have the autonomy, we have the opportunity to be able to say, okay, well, the pathway that you need to learn will be provided for you. And when we don't do this, when we don't provide these pathways or these options, we are excluding many people. So I want to give you an example of a pool party that excludes a lot of people by not providing options. Now, I want you to think about a traditional college class where the instructor creates objectives for learning, and there's a very, very clear goal. So if I was going to be throwing a very big pool party this summer after all of us are vaccinated or we're comfortable being masks, okay, the goal is that every one of you is going to have a wonderful time cooling off at my pool party. I want you to think of that as my course objective. That's what I want all of you to do. And given the right options, given flexibility, all of you would be able to have a lovely time at my party. Imagine for a minute, however, that I only send the invitation on a social media app called TikTok. That's the only way you find out about it. Some of you wouldn't even get the invitation. Just like if you are supporting your students and you only send out an email, for example, if your student didn't check the email, then they wouldn't get the invitation. So I'm going to send this invitation on TikTok. And then we often give the same materials to everyone in our classes. But can you imagine if you went to a party and someone said, here's your bathing suit that you have to wear? You would say, what? We don't all have to wear the same bathing suit, but we sometimes do that with our students. We hand everyone a hard copy of the book instead of saying, do you need a translation? Do you need an audio version of this book? Now, how am I going to measure whether you've had a wonderful time at this party? I, as the instructor, I hold the key. I get to make the assessment. So I've decided that I will be able to tell if you have a wonderful time at this party, if you play water volleyball in the pool, and then you eat a double cheeseburger, and then you also drink a Mai Tai. So some of you are saying, this party sounds really fun. And some of you are saying, no way am I going to that party. And what you'll notice here is I do hold the key to invite people in many different ways. I could send paper invitations. I could send an email. I could tell you right now about the party, and you could hear it in English or French. I could also tell you, you could wear anything that makes you comfortable. You could borrow a bathing suit if you need one, but you don't even have to wear a bathing suit because the goal doesn't say swimming. The goal says cooling off. And then as I am measuring whether or not you had a lovely time at the party, I'm doing so many things here that are construct irrelevant. How many times in our courses do we require everyone to write an essay when the goal isn't actually writing? And so this is an example of, I would not have a party this way because I know that not everybody would be able to come. And if I believe that all of you deserve to be at my party, I have to have a very different skill set in designing this party. And I need to provide you with the options and choices that you need to cool off, because you might just want to dip your feet in the pool. You might want to sit in the shade. Maybe you would like to go swimming, but I can offer lots of things to eat and drink, and all of you would have a wonderful time. So as we think about this work, how do we create classrooms that are not like this pool party? And to do that, we really have to design environments from the beginning where we believe that everyone can be successful. So we're going to take 1 minute here. And again, you have the option to mute the music if it's distracting. But why is it important that we hold the key and we create lots of different pathways from the beginning that work for everyone? Because if we design our classrooms using only one pathway and we don't provide other options, we're going to exclude many learners, especially those learners who have disabilities. So take 1 minute here and just take the time to reflect or share your ideas in either English or French. Okay, so I know that many of you have a background in universal design for learning. And when we think about universal design, it's how do we design from the beginning so that there are options and choices so everybody can meet those objectives. Now, a lot of people think of UDL as something that you do as opposed to something you believe. So at the beginning, when we talked about that stool with 3 legs, we have to really look at our belief systems about teaching and learning. And there are 3 core truths or core beliefs about universal design for learning that really have to be at the foundation of our practice. And your skills or your strategies have to be in service of these beliefs. So often people hear about universal design for learning and they think about, I need to provide options, without really focusing on, why do we need to provide options? Why is it so important to provide options? Because this goes so far beyond our learners who have disabilities. So when we look at the UDL framework, the strategies actually continue to change. There are already 3 versions of the UDL guidelines. And right now they are using this time to create a 4th version of the UDL guidelines. So the strategies continue to evolve as technology becomes more advanced and as we have just a larger evidence base about what students need to learn. Now, these 3 things have never changed. The first is a belief in the concept of variability. And variability is not just that our students are different from each other, but that every student, their needs are actually very different day to day based on the context, based on what is going on in their lives or what is happening in the classroom. So we have to understand what variability is to understand why universal design for learning is so critical, even if you do not serve learners who have disabilities. The next is the belief that everyone can work toward the same course objectives. We don't have to make modifications within our goals. We just have to create very different pathways to get there. And lastly, there's this concept of expert learning, allowing students to choose what they need. Because in traditional classrooms, sometimes there would be different pathways, but instructors were making decisions about who was allowed to use those pathways. And we don't want to do that. So when we believe in the power of expert learning, when we believe in variability, we essentially say it is our job as instructional designers to focus on the goals, to think about, if I were to only do this in one way, what are the potential barriers? And then how do I create different pathways to remove those barriers, but allow learners to choose what they need? Now, a really great example of this is the difference between universal design for learning and differentiated instruction. Now, both of these are going to be necessary to meet the needs of learners, but a lot of practitioners confuse these 2 frameworks because when we're designing through universal design for learning, we are thinking about what is it that all learners have to know and do, and then what are some potential barriers that might prevent people from doing that, and how do I create pathways? So the organizers of this conference said, we want everyone to learn more about inclusive practice. But when we embrace variability, we know that some people speak English, some people speak French, some people speak both. So we want to have pathways for both listening to and reading captions in English and French. But they didn't decide who was going to use what. We got to decide. That's very different from saying, I'm going to put all the French speakers in one group, I'm going to put all the English speakers in another group, and I'm going to give them different experiences. And so that is very much the difference between what it means to self-differentiate your learning and to have your teachers make different groups and the teacher is directing learning. And I know as a college instructor, sometimes I would do that. I would say, well, that group of students can have additional time because they're facing a barrier, but this other group of students can't. And so when we think about universal design for learning, we have to think about, we're using these principles and we're using these guidelines in service of those beliefs. And I know that there are many practitioners who will argue that they're implementing universal design, but they're not using these strategies in service of the beliefs. So let me give you an example of this. So people think I've provided choice. That must mean that I am universally designing. But if the choice doesn't eliminate a barrier, then it's not universal design. So imagine at my pool party, I serve everyone cheeseburgers. Some of you eat a plant-based diet. You're vegetarians. So I'm not universally designing if I give you the option to eat a cheeseburger or a steak. I'm still providing you with a choice, but that choice did not eliminate a barrier for you. It did not include you. And therefore, it is not an example of universal design. So it's not that you provide these choices, it's that you create pathways to eliminate barriers. So this is a framework for how you approach planning. And this is so important, we're going to talk about this in 1 minute, is because this concept of variability is that people need different things at different times. And when we don't embrace variability, we tend to ask ourselves, what do we do for our students with disabilities? But your students with disabilities are not the same. They do not need the same strategies. And even a student who has a disability might need different levels of support depending on the day. So when we recognize that we have to design something that works for all learners, knowing that they're always changing, it's much better that we have a framework to say, I believe in variability. I recognize that my learners might need different things at different times. I believe that everyone can work towards my course objectives. And I also believe that when given the opportunity, people can make really good decisions for themselves. And the strategies that you use are going to always be changing. But what will not change is that belief that flexibility actually includes more learners. So why is it helpful to think of universal design for learning as a framework, as a way to approach planning to eliminate barriers, as opposed to just a list of strategies that you can use, which might not eliminate any barriers? So let's take 1 more minute and reflect. Okay, so perfect. So the goal is to remove barriers. And it's not just about having these options and choices. Is if I do not have these options and choices, I'm excluding people. Some people are left out. And if I want to include, if I want everyone to be successful, I hold the key to creating these different pathways. And the reason that you're looking at a picture of an apple that's getting unpeeled is because some of our beliefs we have to unravel, we have to unpeel them in order to truly embrace what it means to design for everyone. So here in the United States, there is a very common misconception that universal design just means that you're providing choice, as opposed to recognizing what are the barriers that are preventing everyone from being able to learn what they need to learn and share what they need to share based on a course objective. And to do that, we have to realize that some of our beliefs we need to unravel. We need to unlearn some things about what it means to be a teacher. And there's a very famous study at Harvard University where they have a bunch of graduate students and they put them in a completely dark room and they hand them an apple. And when they leave the dark room, they say, tell me, what was the apple like when you were in that room? Now, if I was holding that apple, I would say, well, the apple was red and it was tart if I took a bite of it. And the researchers said, nope, you're wrong. That apple had no color in that dark room. And students were saying, of course it had color. I just couldn't see it. And they said, no, you were in a completely dark room. When there is no light, there is no color. So the apple that you hold in your hand did not have color in that room. It had the potential for color. And graduate students were getting angry. They're like, it didn't lose its color. And they're like, no, it didn't lose its color. It didn't have its color. And this is something that's a great example of cognitive dissonance. It's something that people have a really hard time with. Like, so the color goes away in a dark room? Yes. Another thing that people have a hard time with is understanding what variability really is, because so much of us, we learned that an apple is red, and we also learned that student labels mean something for learning. We talk about students and labels all the time. We say, what do we do for our second language students? What do we do for our students with disabilities? What do we do for our, our students who don't show up to class? But there's not one strategy that will work within that group because there's variability in that group. And so student labels are not very helpful in determining what a student needs. So Allison Posey and I wrote a book called Unlearning, where we talk about what are the common misconceptions about universal design for learning. And the first is a misunderstanding of what variability is. The next is really knowing what your course goals are. If you're not working on a writing goal, not everyone has to write. And too often, we don't really think about what are our goals. We also have to realize that we have to begin to change the way that we design, the way that we think about student engagement, and ultimately what expert learning is, how everyone deserves to choose their own pathway. And a great example of a area in which variability is embraced is a ski mountain. So think for a moment about the 3 core beliefs about universal design. We embrace variability, we focus on what is the goal, and then we allow people to choose their own path. Now, a ski mountain is designed with variability in mind. I did not learn to ski until I was 39 years old. I had never skied one time until I was 39. And now I'm not a great skier, but I'm a skier. And I'm also a mom of 4. And when we go to the ski mountain, we will go with me, my husband, who's an excellent skier, and my 4 kids. And so we get there and we go to the bottom of the mountain and we all take the same chairlift to the top. And then we get to decide which path is the best path for me now. Now, our goal is to get safely back to the base lodge at the bottom to meet for lunch. Now, when we get to the top, a lot of people would think, I would do very well on one of those green circles, which are the easiest paths to ski. And that was designed because the ski mountain knows there are going to be some people who are not expert skiers. So they keep that variability in mind. They make sure there's a pathway for beginning skiers. They also know that there's a wide range of ability. So they have the blue square, which is for intermediate skiers, the black diamond, which is for expert skiers, and then the double black diamond for the really, really good skiers. Now, the ski mountain doesn't tell me what I can and cannot go on. And there's actually lots of different reasons why we would choose different things. And as an instructor, I sometimes say, I don't want those students choosing the easy way I think that all of us are guilty of saying that sometimes, is like, there's a written book and there's an audio, but I don't want the students who are strong readers to just use the audio, right? Sometimes I think that, and I've had to unlearn that, because let's take my husband. My husband is a double black diamond skier, but there's lots of reasons why he would take other pathways depending on the context. So variability is, I am not as strong of a skier as my husband. My husband is a very strong skier, but that doesn't mean he takes a double black diamond all the time, because sometimes he wants to ski with his kids. Sometimes it's snowing so hard, it would be very dangerous for him to take that. Sometimes the line at the lift is so long that he wants to take the longest trail possible because he doesn't want to wait in that line again. But that's what variability is our needs actually changed. And as an instructor, we can't always know what everyone needs. And so another way to think about this is that when we talk about firm goals, flexible means, we realize that we have to have options and choices and say, based on this goal, what is the best option and choice for you? So I say that I'm a heels person. I really like to wear high heels. I love them. But my feet weren't made for heels. I just prefer heels. So when I look at my closet, when I'm going to a nice dressy event, I say, what am I going to wear? And I usually go for heels. But I would not wear heels if I had a blister. And I would not wear heels if it was very icy and I might slip and fall. And I would not wear heels to the beach, or I do not wear heels when I run a marathon. I choose based on not only like what the goal is, but how I'm feeling. So how do we create classrooms where we say, if this really is the goal and I only provided one option, what are the other pathways that I need to have? And then how can I say to learners, based on the fact that you all need to get here, what is the best way for you to do this right now? And what we know is what is necessary for some of our learners is a really great option to provide to everyone. And so when we talk about variability, we talk about that different learners need different things at different times. And if we want to create a group of problem solvers and critical thinkers who can cope and can self-regulate in this beautiful, crazy world where we now live, we need to provide them with options to cope, options to meet goals in the best ways that they can. But we have to allow our learners to choose. We hold the key to allow what is necessary for some to be provided as options for all. And another great example of this is the store Target. You know, there's Amazon, there's Target, there's Walmart, there's lots of these huge stores. And they also embrace variability, firm goals, and expert learning. Because Target says, I want everyone who's looking for a lamp to go to Target to buy their lamp. But they know they cannot just sell this in a Target store, because we do not all live near a Target store. Some of us live very far away from a Target. And so they know that they have to provide the option for delivery. They have to, right? Because they say, if we want everyone to shop at Target, some people just don't live near a Target. So we have to provide an option for delivery. But how many of you, be honest, live near a store that you have gotten delivery? And we say, well, that wasn't really designed for you. Okay. It was designed for people who don't have transportation, who do not live near the store. But sometimes we say, well, I'm very busy. So the best way for me right now to get that lamp is to get the delivery. So what is necessary for people who do not live near a store is still provided as an option to you, even if you live 5 kilometers away. So when we think about, we have some learners with disabilities who there's going to be practices that may be essential for them sometimes. I'm not going to say all the time. I have a daughter with very complex needs and her needs change. But what are some practices that you know may be essential for some students with disabilities? like a translation, an audio option, the opportunity to revise, opportunity to work together. We think about those options, and why wouldn't we provide them to everyone? So if I was having a pool party, that's the difference between saying, okay, everyone's going to eat a cheeseburger unless you're a vegetarian, then I will make you a veggie burger. Instead, why wouldn't I say, I'm going to grill some hamburgers, I'm going to grill some zucchini, I'm going to grill some chicken. You decide what's best for you. Okay, what is necessary for some, we should provide as flexible pathways and options to everyone. And so let's take a minute and reflect on some practices that you know that maybe one student requested, or maybe a couple of students need, but by providing them to everyone, you're saying, I want to include everybody. I embrace variability. I know your needs are different. And I also want to empower expert learning. I want to give you the pathways that you need to be. So I think that one of the most important things that I have learned in the past 20 years is just how so many of our beliefs about teaching and learning prevent us from providing the options that students need. And so there's often this belief that everybody should be challenging themselves every second of every day in every class, and that we should not be providing supports to people who we believe do not need those supports. But again, that doesn't embrace variability. That doesn't embrace expert learning. Also, I would often not want to provide different options and choices because I felt that it was easy without thinking about what the goal actually was. So if I want all of my learners to learn about variability, and I say to them, you can either read this text or you can listen to this text, in the end, if they all are able to answer a question about variability, they have met the goal. And if my task is to make sure that I'm designing a classroom environment that allows every person equitable opportunities to access instruction and to meet or exceed that goal, I also want to say, listen, I want you to challenge yourselves when you're in a place where it makes sense to challenge yourself. I certainly don't challenge myself in every aspect of my life, and things that I really care about, I do. And so how do we design this so we are always thinking about our own beliefs, building our own skill sets? And then again, how do we create a system that moves this forward? And I think that one of the really amazing things that happened in 2015 is Universal Design for Learning has been a framework for 30 years, but was not required in any sort of federal law until 2015, when the Every Student Succeeds Act was passed. And in 2015, it became a federal requirement for every state in the United States to create something called a multi-tiered system of support built on a foundation of universal design for learning. So I want to unpack this visual for you because it really shows why UDL has come to the forefront of the work that we're doing in classrooms from the time students are very young up until college and university. So when we look at this multi-tiered system of support, the goal of a multi-tiered system of support is to create a tier 1 bottom first floor of the schoolhouse that everyone can access. So when you're looking at that little schoolhouse in the middle, on the bottom, tier 1 is universal support. Every learner should be able to get into that school. So we're talking physically accessible and cognitively accessible, academically accessible, socially and emotionally accessible. So we want to welcome all students in and have them in inclusive classrooms. But to do that, if we look at that circle around it, we have to recognize what are some of the academic barriers, what are some of the behavioral barriers, and what are some of the social emotional barriers, like student stress and trauma? What prevents students from being able to access a rigorous college education? Because it's more than just academics. Okay, it's also, again, the types of behavior that are expected, cultural norms, and then social emotional drivers like stress. So if we want to eliminate the barriers academically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally, then we have to universally design. We have to remove those barriers. Okay, only then can we guarantee equitable access. Only then can we say, if you enroll in school, we have a classroom for you where you're going to have the options and choices that you need to learn, the materials you need to support that learning, and the opportunities to share what you know. And so as designers, we're thinking about those barriers. Now, what I love about a multi-tiered system is the recognition that some students may need more than what is provided in that tier 1 or first best instruction. You might have some students who need more support from you than others, who might really value from you pulling a small group and giving feedback. But what's interesting is that is provided in addition to and not instead of. So, when we talk about, for instance, disability services, that should be, disability services are provided in addition to being a part of a very inclusive classroom. So that tier 2, that like specially designed the instruction specifically for students, that needs to be in addition to having a class that any student could be successful in from the beginning. And so this is not just thinking, how do I make my classroom accessible for the students that I have, but how do I recognize barriers that would prevent any student from being successful here? And how do I design that with variability in mind, knowing that I might also need to provide really specific supports for some students, for example, sign language or Braille. That would be in addition to a really inclusive classroom. And so when we're talking about multi-tiered, it's making sure that everyone is prepared to meet the needs of every learner, but also recognizing that some students might need more than that, more intensive support. But we use this phrasing called supplement, not supplant, which I love, which means add in addition to a really inclusive class. Not instead of, not we have these really exclusionary classes and we'll give you Braille. It's the classroom has to be designed for all learners first. So every learner has equitable access. And then we say, are there any additional tools that a student may need very specifically in order to be successful? So what is so different about this is the drivers. So if you look on the outside of the circle, you're going to see 3 drivers. And think back to the stool, which is we have to build a skill set to do that. So when we say competency drivers, do we have ongoing professional learning and professional support? Do we co-plan and look at student work with our peers? Do we have evaluation systems that are looking for us to design instruction in a way that's really inclusive? We have to build the skill set from the outside in. We also need leadership that's going to ensure that we're onboarding staff who believe that all students can learn, that will lean into and be willing to build that skill set to allow more students to be successful. It's about, shared responsibility and making time for people to work together. And then you have your implementation drivers, which are like technology solutions, your course syllabus, the different types of assessments that you give. How can you design those so they're flexible? So a multi-tiered system is, how does a school or organization create a plan to build the competency of its educators, to make sure that they have access to technology that allows them to be more flexible with meeting the needs of students, with curriculum materials that are more flexible? And how do we create leadership that ensures that the organization is always moving towards being more inclusive and more equitable? So this multi-tiered system, again, is recognizing that when students don't learn, it's because of barriers with design. And the more aware we are of naming barriers academically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally, the more that we can recognize that more students can be included if we universally design. This also comes down to recognizing those drivers. Is we can't just always be reacting. We have to have a plan to build this into the future. How do we build this skill set? How do we make sure we have the technology and the curriculum and the scope and sequence and the syllabi? And how do we create leaders who believe in practices and procedures and professional learning that creates this flexibility? So another way to think about what it means to supplement and not supplant, and then we'll spend the last 15 minutes on questions, is when you think about going to the dentist, that would be a tier 1 universal support. So everyone goes to the dentist, but then the dentist will give an x-ray and will say, does this patient need more than just the cleaning? So if you look at these two mouths on the right-hand side, you can see that there's braces, there's elastics, there's an Invisalign. But what we want to make sure is that when we talk about the dental services, we want to make sure that everyone can get a checkup and a cleaning. But we acknowledge that some people might also need braces or their cavities filled, and they might also need a root canal or have surgery on their mouth. And if you need all those things, you should get all of those things. And what we sometimes do is we eliminate tier 1. We say, we'll just put all of these students in a lower level course. And we eliminate that tier 1. So when we talk about supplement, not supplant, how do we make sure that every single student is successful in an inclusive classroom, knowing that as an organization, we might also need to provide additional support? That UDL is not a panacea necessarily, that some learners may need more support, may need more technology than will be provided for all students, but we are going to make sure that we have an organization that provides that, in addition to a really inclusive tier 1. And I feel like sometimes when there's pushback about universal design for learning, it ends up being students with like really significant, specific, complex needs. Like, I wouldn't necessarily design this presentation with a sign language interpreter unless I knew that somebody needed it. Okay, so that's an example of a tier 2 support added to a tier 1 presentation, of which has considered language barriers, auditory processing barriers, because there's captions, there's access to the slide, there's opportunities for reflection. So it's designed with variability in mind. Everyone has access to this presentation, but ultimately we recognize that the system also needs a mechanism to figure out if there's really specific needs of students, how do we provide that in addition to and not instead of? So our last chat alert here before questions and answers, of which I see there are 10, and once I stop sharing my slides, I'll be able to see those questions. This concept of unlearning, unraveling that we need to design based on labels, unraveling that there's an easy way and a hard way to meet a goal. How does this process and a deeper appreciation for variability, knowing that the reasons that we need supports will vary greatly depending on the task, what are some potential next steps in your journey as an educator where you think about how do we design a classroom that works for everyone, but how do we also create these relationships with learners to figure out specifically if there's something they need, how do we make sure that's available in addition to what we have designed? Okay, so it means not only we provide options and choices, but we're open to learner voice to ensure that everybody gets what they need when they need it, even if maybe it wasn't designed for in that first best instruction. So last minute here, Swift. All right, so beautiful. So I'm looking in the question and answer here. And it would be very, very helpful to get some translations on some of
Yeah, I can, I'm gonna help you with that.
Okay.
Yeah, so just for the translator, I'm gonna read the comments because there are a lot of comments in French.
Okay.
Because I ask people to write their inclusive practices, so they shared it with us. So I'm going to read the question in French, and you can listen to Sean translating the question. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one, so the most popular one. Oh, I have to change my my language. Just a second. OK, donc première question de Marie-Christine. Pas une question, mais un commentaire plutôt. Donc, elle, ce qu'elle suggère comme pratique inclusive, c'est une possibilité de choisir le mode de présentation pour un projet à réaliser, donc comme par exemple l'écrit, l'oral ou l'enregistrement. Je vais en lire quelques-unes et après, Cathy, tu vas pouvoir commenter dessus si tu le désires. Une autre pratique qui a été partagée dans le Q&A, donc offrir différents formats pour accéder au savoir, donc écrit, donc c'est la même chose. Proposer un plan de cours expliquant sa vision de l'apprentissage et de l'inclusion dès la première semaine pour favoriser la persévérance de tous, même si le programme semble ambitieux pour certains. Je vais m'arrêter ici et je pense que ça peut valoir la peine, Cathy, de commenter peut-être sur ce commentaire-là, parce que je pense qu'il est bien important.
Yes. So the first comment I want to make is about providing lots of options and choices for how students learn and how students share what they know. And my best advice for this are the two words, construct relevant. So sometimes the goal is writing. And so when the goal is writing, there will not be an option to give me an audio or a video. And so I think that in some ways we open ourselves up to say, yes, we want to be so flexible, but it always comes back to what is the firm goal. So if I want to know that everybody understands variability, for example, I might have an essential question such as, why is an understanding of variability critical for all educators? Students can answer that in writing, in a video, in audio, in a poster. That's fine with me. However, I am also an academic writing teacher at the college level, and everyone needs to write. So when I'm thinking about, I'm teaching writing, I might have options and choices like you can handwrite your first draft, you can use voice to text, you can type it. You have the option to use exemplars. You have the option to use spell check. You have an option to have a peer review, but you're all writing because the standard is writing, or you're all submitting writing. Now, I recognize that I might have some students who face barriers to physically writing, which is why I provide the option to voice to text, but I need writing handed in. So when you're thinking about options and choices, always start with those goals. And the same is true if you are a public speaking instructor. Your learners need to speak in front of people. That's construct relevant for the class. So, I think that it's always coming down to, when I first learned about UDL, I think I compromised rigor in some places because I wasn't thinking about what options and choices do everyone need to get to this goal. I was just thinking about, I need lots of options. So that's my best advice. As far as letting students know you can do this work, these are the course objectives, I would ask students to begin to brainstorm what potential barriers they might face. So, being really proactive about, some students have families, some students have schedules where they're, you know, trying to work and go to school. And then some have barriers academically, you know, behaviorally, socially, emotionally. And it's almost as though like, these are the course objectives. I'm going to be very flexible and about, you know, how you learn, how you share what you know. But let's start by saying that when you face barriers, you need to know that there's always ways to eliminate those barriers as well. And here's some things that I have already considered, but let's brainstorm together. Are there any other barriers that you feel like are going to present a problem? And you can almost co-create some of the options and choices with your learners. But, you know, I think that it's basically starting with your course objectives always and saying, like, what are all the ways that students could learn this? What are the materials they would need? And then what are all the ways that students could share that they actually met this goal? And from there, saying what barriers might prevent you from doing that. So I'll give you an example from my own practice as like a college instructor. Is I'm very loose on deadlines because I understand that some people need a little bit more time. I teach in a graduate program, so people that I'm working with often have full-time jobs and families, and they're also trying to take classes. And so having an assignment due every week can be a lot. So I said, like, listen, you can't leave all the assignments until the end, because I won't have the time to provide you with feedback. But I do understand that sometimes you might need like an extra weekend to get things done. So I'm not ever going to take away points for late work. However, it's also not fair to your classmates or me as an instructor to dump 10 assignments on me the third week of class. And so, you know, I basically said a barrier for me is like, I want to be able to give you feedback. I can give you extra time. And the class together said, well, how about if it's more than 2 weeks late, you assign a grade, but you don't provide feedback? And I would have never thought about that as an option. And the class said, we would rather have the flexibility and get peer review on our own, knowing that you're okay getting it later, but we also understand that you can't take the 20 minutes to write us a letter to explain what we need to improve. So sometimes it's just those conversations is like, if your students could tell you from the beginning, I can tell you right now, those deadlines will be difficult because of this. What are the other options? And just have those conversations. But I know I only have 2 minutes left here. So this is like a minute to win it. Pauline, is there one more question that I could answer before we?
Yeah, I think there is something that there was a question that we have in the Q&A. And I think it's a question that a lot of people ask themselves. And that's the following. So it's in French. So I'm going to read it in French. Alors, comment travailler avec les croyances des professeurs face à l'inclusion? Comment les inclure avec leurs différentes croyances?
That is an amazing question. And I honestly believe the best answer to that is to give them options and choices when they're learning about universal design for learning. So it's very difficult to push back on something you have personally benefited from. So when teachers come together and you start with, you know, some of us are going to have these different beliefs, but let's just talk about when we go to a scheme out and what happens. Let's talk about when we go to the store, what happens. Like, isn't it great that somebody trusts you to make decisions for yourself? What is one way you can begin to start doing that in your classrooms? You know, I think that it's very powerful when learners have options in professional learning to say, do you want to read this or do you want to listen to this? You know, do you want to listen to it in French or do you want to listen to it in English? And when we can allow people to experience and then reflect on that experience to say, how did this go for you? How did this eliminate barriers for you? Okay, great. How can you begin to provide that to your learners? Because this is a process of unlearning, certainly, that is difficult. We have to grieve the loss of some of the practices that we felt were very successful. But what we didn't maybe recognize is if those practices were successful, if there's any one practice that was successful for all learners, it wasn't a very diverse class. It was probably a very exclusionary class to begin with, because we know that not everybody has their needs met in the same way. So I would say design experiences for colleagues to have options and choices, identify barriers they're facing, and begin there. But I know that my time is up. It has been wonderful spending this hour with you. I don't know what you're transitioning to next, but Swift will play, one song to get you there in a moment. So Pauline, if you could let us know what the next step's going to be, then we'll dance our way into it.
Actually, we have a discussion period about your conference. So if you want to stay, you are more than welcome. So people can talk about what you said. It's really up to you. So we're gonna have a 30-minute discussion period to talk about all that, and maybe to talk about the comments that people let in the chat. So we really want to give the opportunity to everyone to express themselves and to share their ideas with each other. So
okay, perfect.
If you want to stay, you are more than welcome.
We have to jump. We have another presentation in Washington State that's happening in a half hour. So we're going to go transition to that. But we will play. Swift, why don't you play 1 minute of music before they open up that chat? Bye, everyone.
Bye, Kathy. Thanks so much for coming. It was great. I think that everybody was really excited about your presentation. You can see it in the chat. I don't know if Laure, Catherine, and Effie wanted to add anything else to you before you leave, because it was such a great honor to have you here today. And I think, yeah, that was a success.
Only a humongous, really immense merci.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
And truly inspiring. And what a beautiful way to begin this journey, this reflection that we're going to have in the next 3 days. So thank you.
My pleasure, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so I'm going to try to be a little bit more inclusive there. So I'm going to stop speaking English and I'm going to switch in French so we can switch places. So let me switch the language in the language channels. Alors, donc pour le reste de la demi-heure, ce qu'on va faire, c'est que on va ouvrir la discussion. Donc, on va pouvoir partager aussi les commentaires que vous avez laissés dans le Q&A. Et on va aussi pouvoir partir des discussions si vous souhaitez, et aussi éventuellement, si vous avez des questions, on peut y répondre également. Alors, la façon dont on va procéder, donc si vous voulez vous exprimer oralement, donc ne pas passer nécessairement par le Q&A ou par le chat, vous pouvez lever la main. Et à ce moment-là, on va vous donner l'autorisation d'activer votre micro et on pourra vous donner la parole. Alors, Catherine, Laure, Effie et moi-même, on va être présentes pour alimenter la discussion avec vous. Donc, n'hésitez pas à lever la main si vous avez un commentaire. Je ne sais pas aussi si Laure, Effie et Catherine voulaient ajouter quelque chose avant qu'on parte cette séance de discussion.
Tu as très bien fait ça, Pauline. Donc, allons-y avec les questions, les commentaires.
Moi, je peux commencer peut-être ce que je retiens en fait de la présentation de Katie Novak. pourtant on la connaît, on lit ses livres, etc. C'est vraiment qu'elle a mis la table sur la variabilité. Puis on en parle beaucoup dans notre communauté de pratique, d'offrir des options. Puis c'est notre premier mantra, entre guillemets, mais la variabilité, de prendre en compte le contexte dans lequel l'étudiant peut se trouver, ça me paraît très intéressant. En tout cas, je ne sais pas ce que vous en pensez, on peut partir la discussion sur ça peut-être.
Les filles, est-ce que vous vouliez rajouter quelque chose à ça avant que les personnes du public se manifestent?
Ben, moi, j'ajouterais justement la variabilité, mais aussi cette notion d'être très ancré avec ce qui se passe en ce moment. Donc, cette notion de ce n'est pas un modèle qui est fixe, qui évolue, qui grandit au contraire et qui est en lien avec notre réalité quotidienne qui elle-même évolue beaucoup. Et là, je vais conforter ce que dit Catherine, on la suit depuis longtemps, on lit ses écrits, mais encore une fois, là, de l'avoir dans cette présentation-là, je suis en train de recevoir toutes ces informations qui n'ont rien de figé, qui partent de choses qu'on connaît, mais qui nous font avancer et qui sont directement liées avec ce qu'on vit dans nos salles de classe.
And I guess if I can just add a little something, one thing that Katie mentioned today, she talked about an option or a choice must eliminate a barrier and include everyone. And when we're implementing UDL, sometimes, we'll think of a strategy, we'll think of an approach that will make our class more inclusive, will make our environment, our learning environment more inclusive. But the idea of really thinking about it and saying, what am I eliminating as a potential barrier? What is it that it's responding to? I think makes it even more explicit in terms of what my purpose is. And it makes me, I think, even better able to relay to my students the purpose of, why it is that I'm offering certain options and stuff. So I find, as you said, Laure and Catherine, we've been in this conversation for many years now, and listening to it today, every time we hear something, we just keep building and going further, in our reflection. So it's a wonderful thing. I hope everyone was able to get something this morning from this great presentation.
Merci beaucoup, Effie. Si vous me permettez, je voudrais revenir justement sur la question qui a été posée à Cathy tantôt. Donc, comment travailler avec les croyances des professeurs face à l'inclusion? Comment les inclure avec leurs différentes croyances? Alors, je ne sais pas si la question ça se voulait cibler spécifiquement les croyances religieuses ou plus les croyances dans un sens large. Alors, moi, je vais rebondir plus dans un sens large. Et peut-être que j'aimerais vous entendre. Alors ici, comme vous le savez, le symposium est ciblé sur l'enseignement supérieur, donc c'est l'université, mais c'est aussi le collégial. Donc ici, dans la salle, il y a des personnes qui proviennent de l'université et du collégial. Et de ce que j'ai pu constater, je sais qu'il y a des différences par rapport à cette attitude-là, déjà de refuser, pas de refuser, mais d'avoir une résistance peut-être à appliquer certaines méthodes inclusives, parce qu'on croit, par exemple, si on prend l'exemple de Cathy tantôt, donc l'exemple où on va accorder un délai pour remettre un travail, par exemple. Donc, c'est sûr qu'il y a une question il faut être juste envers les autres étudiants, etc. Mais moi, par exemple, un exemple que j'ai déjà entendu à l'université, donc c'est il y a quelqu'un qui me demande un délai, c'est probablement parce qu'il veut plus de temps puis il n'a pas eu le temps de faire son truc. Et puis, donc, je pense qu'il y a cette espèce, on parlait de désapprendre, il y a aussi les croyances où on a pas des préjugés, mais peut-être des stéréotypes sur les comportements des étudiants, ou si on leur laisse plus de temps, c'est parce que s'ils demandent plus de temps, c'est probablement parce que finalement, c'est pas tant qu'ils ont pas réussi à faire le travail, c'est plus qu'ils veulent plus de temps parce que finalement, ils l'ont pas fait, puis ils veulent plus de temps. Donc, moi, je sais que c'est une réaction que j'ai beaucoup entendue à l'université, puis je serais curieuse de savoir en fait ce qu'il en est au collégial. Et si c'est différent, pourquoi est-ce qu'on verrait cette différence-là, en fait, de cette résistance à penser que les mesures inclusives, et puis je pense qu'aujourd'hui, il y en a qui demandent parce qu'on parle encore d'accommodement au Québec, qui demandent des mesures d'accommodement puis qui sont refusées parce que les professeurs ne pensent pas que c'est nécessaire. Et peut-être parce que c'est justement, ils ne sont pas capables de se mettre dans la peau de quelqu'un, puis je ne sais plus qui c'est qui l'a mentionné tantôt, mais le fait d'essayer de faire l'expérience, ça fait comprendre beaucoup de choses. Et donc, en tout cas, je vais m'arrêter de parler et je vous lance la balle, en fait. Quelle est la situation au niveau collégial et à l'université aussi sur cette résistance, en fait, à inclure des pratiques inclusives dans leur enseignement? Les filles, je ne sais pas si vous pouvez commencer. Ah, je vois qu'il y a Paul Turcotte qui lève la main. Donc, Paul, si tu veux prendre la parole.
Oui, vous m'entendez bien?
Oui.
Ben, parfait. En fait, sur ce point-là que tu viens de soulever, Pauline, j'ai mis ma réponse un peu dans le clavardage en rappelant quelque chose que Mme Novak mentionnait, qui est difficile de remettre en question un système qui nous a souri. Les professeurs au collégial et à l'université sont des gens pour qui le parcours scolaire, évidemment, chaque parcours est individuel, mais bref, peu importe la difficulté avec lesquelles les professeurs sont passés au travers, ils ont eu du succès, ils ont obtenu les diplômes, ils ont probablement eu des bons résultats. Bref, ils ont fini en tête de ce système-là, donc, qui a tout plein de belles qualités, qui est ici au Québec quand même relativement démocratique, qui offre des chances, qui tend à être de plus en plus inclusif, mais qui a quand même ses particularités et ses biais qui favorisent un certain type d'apprenants. Puis je le dis pour moi-même, je pense que peut-être d'autres personnes vont pouvoir se reconnaître, mais moi, j'étais bon en écrivant et en lisant. C'est une force que j'avais. J'avais des livres plein la maison chez nous. Quand j'étais tanné de mes cousins turbulents, je me cachais en dessous de la table pour lire des livres. C'est juste comme ça que j'étais. Puis j'aimais écrire. Je trouvais que c'était le fun de faire des phrases qui rimaient. Puis j'étais passionné par la grammaire. Donc, pour moi, ça a été facile. Donc, de remettre en question un système comme ça basé sur, par exemple, la lecture et l'écriture, ça peut être difficile. Par contre, je pense que de dire ces choses-là, de dire que notre système est conçu pour favoriser ou rendre plus à l'aise ou accueillir ou, en tout cas, bref, donner plus de chance, si on veut, à un certain type d'apprenant. Puis je pense que même au niveau primaire, là, on parle des études secondaires, post-secondaires, pardon, mais même dans les études primaires, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup d'études qui se font sur, par exemple, l'apprentissage à la lecture des jeunes garçons. C'est pas très facile, la littératie pour les jeunes garçons. Bref, il y a toutes sortes de failles du système comme ça qu'il faut mettre en lumière puis qu'il faut tenter, en fait, pallier, tout simplement, par la reconnaissance de la variabilité, la reconnaissance des différents besoins. Et une autre chose, peut-être, qui est un défi pour beaucoup de professeurs, pour rester dans la thématique là, de comment convertir ou de comment convaincre, en fait, les professeurs au niveau supérieur d'être plus inclusifs. Quelque chose qui n'est pas nécessairement dans les mœurs, beaucoup, puis Mme Novak l'a mentionné, c'est d'écouter. Écouter nos étudiants, leur demander activement, pas juste répondre aux questions, poser nous-mêmes les questions pour dire de quoi vous avez besoin, qu'est-ce que je fais qui pourrait être mieux, qu'est-ce que vous voudriez, vous, faire. Si on s'entend sur le but, là, le but puis les objectifs, on s'entend là-dessus. Puis en fait, c'est le professeur puis le programme qui décide c'est quoi les objectifs à atteindre. Mais après ça, pour le chemin pour se rendre, peut-être qu'on peut en discuter. Donc, écouter les étudiants puis être conscient de nos propres biais.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. J'ai vu une autre main levée, j'ai vu que Catherine, tu as levé la main, mais avant, il y avait Madame Laflamme ou Monsieur Laflamme, je m'excuse si je ne vois pas le prénom. Donc, vous pouvez donner votre commentaire, je vais vous donner l'autorisation de parler.
Oui, bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui, très bien.
Donc, c'est Mélanie Laflamme. Quelques réflexions, quelques commentaires. Moi, je suis quelqu'un qui a comme un parcours très standard et traditionnel au niveau de l'apprentissage. Là, je suis issue des sciences humaines, professeure d'histoire, puis devenue conseillère pédagogique. Ce que j'entends beaucoup par rapport à les pratiques inclusives de la part des professeurs au niveau de la résistance, c'est oui, mais on va baisser les standards dans la croyance de plusieurs professeurs, lorsqu'on donne des choix ou lorsqu'on devient flexible, nécessairement, on baisse les standards. Un des dossiers dont je m'occupe qui a fait en sorte que ça a complètement questionné certaines pratiques pédagogiques chez moi et chez mes collègues, c'est de m'occuper des étudiants autochtones, en fait, du développement pédagogique pour les étudiants inuits qu'on a chez nous. Nécessairement, tu dois être flexible, sinon tu n'y arriveras juste pas. Et comme ton but, c'est que les étudiants suivent les cours, restent et à la limite diplôme, s'ils décident de poursuivre, il va falloir que tu changes un petit peu tes façons de faire. L'autre chose que je voulais aussi ajouter, c'est qu'au niveau institutionnel, il y a des grosses barrières également. J'ai un exemple tout récent cette semaine où je questionnais nos ressources humaines à savoir pourquoi est-ce qu'ils ne laissaient pas les professeurs, en fait n'importe quel postulant venir faire le test de français en ayant le droit à des outils de correction, donc dictionnaire, puis un conjugaire. On me répondait qu'on voulait évaluer leur vrai niveau de français, mais je dis le vrai niveau de français, c'est lorsqu'on a le droit à nos outils de correction parce que dans la vraie vie, on utilise des outils de correction lorsqu'on rédige. Donc, j'essaie de leur faire comprendre qu'il est en train de tronquer la réalité puis que dans les faits, cette personne-là produirait peut-être d'excellents écrits si elle a le droit à ces outils. C'est des croyances aussi que je dois parfois déconstruire chez des professeurs. Cela dit, j'aimerais revenir sur l'exemple que Katie a donné par rapport à l'idée qui est sortie de sa classe là, sur le délai de correction lorsque les étudiants ont proposé, dans le fond, de ne pas donner une rétroaction, mais seulement la note en échange donc d'un délai pour pouvoir remettre le travail, d'avoir un peu plus de temps. Là, moi, je mets un bémol à ce genre de choses-là puisque je ne suis pas contre des délais, mais l'idée d'enlever la rétroaction, pour moi, ça vient nuire à l'apprentissage. C'est-à-dire que la rétroaction sur l'évaluation, c'est ce qui nous aide à nous améliorer et à pointer les choses qu'on a peut-être mal intégrées ou qu'on doit travailler davantage. Donc, si on enlève ça, il y a un manque. Il faut faire attention à ça. Puis, il y a un domaine que je connais moins, puis que peut-être ici, parmi vous, il y a des collègues que vous connaissez bien, mais c'est le domaine des sciences pures et dures. Là, souvent, je pense qu'on va rencontrer beaucoup de résistance sur comment tu veux que je donne des choix, c'est un rapport de laboratoire, il doit faire telle expérience, etc. Donc, c'était mes questionnements, réflexions à chaud, comme ça. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mélanie. J'ai vu que, Catherine, tu avais levé la main tantôt. Est-ce que tu voulais réagir à quelque chose qui avait été dit?
Oui, je voulais revenir sur ce que Paul disait en dialoguant avec les étudiants, mais aussi en dialoguant avec les professeurs. Puis Mélanie vient exactement de dire ça, c'est en leur faisant prendre conscience que nous aussi, on a des barrières. Puis l'exemple de ne pas avoir d'outils pour rédiger quelque chose, effectivement, dans la vraie vie, on a tous nos outils. Donc, c'est souvent aussi une résistance des professeurs qui vont dire « moi, je les prépare pour leur métier ». Donc, il faut qu'ils expérimentent certaines choses. Étant professeur de français langue seconde, oui, je préfère que mes étudiants connaissent les conjugaisons par cœur. Ça va plus vite quand on écrit. Puis, il y a des choses qu'il faut qu'ils automatisent. Mais Est-ce que dans la vraie vie, on n'a pas tous le dictionnaire, le téléphone à côté de nous pour vérifier un mot? Nous, on travaille dans les 2 langues avec Effie et Laure et on est constamment en train de googler un mot en anglais pour voir si c'est le bon mot, de se référer à nos pairs aussi. On demande à Effie si elle a bien, si c'est bien le bon mot que Google nous donne. Donc, c'est vraiment un faux problème, mais vraiment leur faire prendre conscience qu'eux aussi ont des barrières. Par exemple, le petit dernier n'a pas dormi et moi, je n'ai pas dormi toute la nuit. Est-ce que le lendemain, pour donner mon cours, je suis bien? Pas forcément. Donc, peut-être que je peux donner un cours asynchrone ou que je peux donner un autre exercice. Il y a beaucoup de choses, mais vraiment, ça part de l'expérience. Puis, avec la communauté de pratique, on le voit. Souvent, c'est des profs qui viennent et qui ont expérimenté, ou leurs proches, ou leurs enfants, ou eux-mêmes, des difficultés et qui vont se dire « Ah oui, c'est vrai, il y a des barrières et j'aimerais bien les lever pour tout le monde. » Voilà, c'est tout ce que je voulais commenter.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. Oui, ce que tu viens de dire et aussi ce que Mélanie a mentionné, donc le fait que finalement, c'est vrai qu'on a tous un dictionnaire à côté de soi, puis on a tous… puis ça me fait penser qu'en fait, c'est le cas pour beaucoup de choses. Et puis, ce n'est pas juste la pédagogie inclusive. Je pense que c'est l'enseignement en général, la façon dont on nous enseigne et la façon dont on nous évalue. On veut apprendre les choses par cœur. Et là, si on est capable de recracher les choses par cœur, on a super bien réussi l'examen, mais au fond, on n'a rien compris. Et donc, on nous demande, c'est ça, je pense qu'il y a aussi un problème plus profond qu'avant d'essayer de régler le problème de l'inclusion, il faut essayer de régler le problème de la façon dont on enseigne d'une façon générale. Parce que combien de fois on a fait des examens et on s'est dit, mais si je fais ça dans la vraie vie, je vais avoir accès à Google, puis je vais avoir accès à tout ce qu'on me demande là. Finalement, si je ne le sais pas, ce n'est pas grave parce que je peux le retrouver facilement. Et en tout cas, c'est une réflexion que je voulais partager. Là, vous n'êtes pas obligé de répondre. Je sais qu'il y a Laure qui avait levé la main aussi, puis le temps commence à filer. Donc, il ne reste plus que quelques minutes. Donc, je vais donner la parole à Laure.
Je ne voudrais pas prendre la place de quelqu'un d'autre, mais je veux juste m'assurer qu'il n'y ait personne d'autre qui veuille intervenir, étant donné justement que…
Non, il n'y a pas d'autres mains levées pour l'instant, donc tu peux y aller, Laure.
Mais je voulais juste reconnaître dans les conversations qu'on vient d'avoir et les commentaires qu'on vient de faire, reconnaître le changement de paradigme dans la réflexion dans laquelle on est. Adopter une pédagogie inclusive, c'est en lien avec notre société d'aujourd'hui, avec la réalité que nous vivons aujourd'hui, mais bien au-delà de seulement l'enseignement ou l'apprentissage. Au quotidien, dans nos vies, voyons comment nous usons de nos téléphones cellulaires, quels sont les outils que nous utilisons dans le quotidien, à commencer par tôt le matin quand on se réveille jusqu'à la fin de la journée, autant dans notre vie professionnelle que dans notre vie personnelle. Mais tout cela, on le vit sans vraiment s'en rendre compte. Dans notre enseignement, dans notre professionnel, on est obligé d'y réfléchir. Et j'aimerais revenir sur des mots qui ont été utilisés autant en anglais qu'en français. Il me semble que c'est notre collègue Paul qui a utilisé d'être consciemment, consciously, to be consciously inclusive, être consciemment inclusif. Donc, de faire une réflexion à cet égard-là. Et cette réflexion-là nécessite donc tout le travail de changement de paradigme, tout le travail de revenir sur les idées préconçues qui sont comme innées, qui sont des réflexes, et dire, OK, mais pourquoi est-ce que je pense ça? Est-ce qu'il ne pourrait pas y avoir autre chose? Et donc, reconnaître aussi que ce changement de paradigme n'est pas facile. C'est exigeant. Parfois, ça peut même être douloureux. Donc, donner cette voix aux étudiants quand on est dans notre salle de classe, savoir ce qui va les aider, mais donner cette voix aussi aux enseignants pour savoir qu'est-ce qui est difficile, quelles sont leurs barrières et commencer cette conversation-là. Donc, en fait, je voulais terminer sur ce mot-là. En ce qui me concerne, c'est vraiment reconnaître l'ampleur du travail et reconnaître l'exigence du travail, de ce changement de paradigme. Mais quels bénéfices on peut en tirer? On est là pour le partager, justement.
Alors, Effie, je vois que tu as levé la main juste avant que tu prennes la parole, donc il reste quelques minutes. Je voudrais lire un commentaire. Justement, je voudrais peut-être susciter un petit peu la réflexion d'un commentaire qui a été mis dans le Q&A. Donc, je vais le lire. Donc, dans son milieu, on ne permet, dans mon milieu, on ne permet, donc c'est Stéphanie qui nous dit ce commentaire. Donc, dans mon milieu, on ne permet pas aux enseignants de donner du temps supplémentaire à tous les étudiants. Car cela serait inéquitable pour les étudiants qui ont des accommodements de temps supplémentaires. Est-ce vraiment inéquitable? Je suis mitigée. Donc, je pense que c'est une bonne question parce que justement, on parle de qu'est-ce qui est juste en fait. Et je pense que la question est très difficile en fait de savoir qu'est-ce qui est juste, qu'est-ce qui est équitable. Effie, est-ce que tu voulais rajouter quelque chose?
C'était exactement ce que je voulais faire. On était sur la même voie d'onde. Je travaille au centre d'aide et je suis une des conseillères qui offre aux étudiants leurs accommodements, qui détermine qu'est-ce qui est un accommodement raisonnable pour les étudiants. Et c'est une question qui revient depuis qu'on est aussi, qu'on travaille en ligne, les examens se font en ligne et que c'est les profs qui offrent le temps supplémentaire pour les étudiants. C'est une question qui est revenue. Et Alice Havel, tantôt aussi, a posé la même question. Elle a dit, mais il y a certains étudiants qui reçoivent des accommodements qui croient que ce n'est pas juste. Parce que pourquoi tout le monde va avoir la même chose que moi? Comment moi, je vais avoir mon accommodement, m'assurer d'avoir le temps supplémentaire nécessaire? Et c'est là notre réflexion de voir, quand on le fait, c'est pour éliminer quelle barrière? Est-ce qu'on a bien évalué le temps nécessaire afin qu'un étudiant soit capable de compléter l'examen? Et à ce temps-là, à cette durée, combien de temps avons-nous ajouté pour nous assurer que tout le monde aura la chance de finir son examen? Et encore une fois, on revient à l'idée d'être très explicite afin que les étudiants comprennent bien que nous avons bien calculé le temps nécessaire et que nous accordons le temps supplémentaire afin que les étudiants puissent revenir aux questions, ceux qui ont besoin d'écouter ou de relire leurs questions afin de bien comprendre, l'étape aussi d'écriture, toutes ces choses-là qu'on a bien réfléchi et que le temps accordé est là pour tous afin qu'ils aient tous la chance de tout faire avant de soumettre leur examen. Et c'est là qu'on est équitable. On n'a pas tous besoin de la même recette pour être équitable. C'est ça l'idée que quelqu'un peut finir après 1 heure, l'autre personne restera toutes les 3 heures. Mais c'est vraiment à nous de faire la réflexion et d'être clair avec nos étudiants pourquoi nous avons offert cette durée de temps pour l'examen.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Effie. Donc, il est 10h28, donc il reste 2 minutes à la session. Et je vais en profiter un petit peu pour vous présenter un peu plus en détail le reste du fonctionnement du symposium et le fonctionnement de la plateforme. Donc, vous avez probablement pu constater qu'il y a plein de choses sur la plateforme. Vous pouvez y trouver plein de matériel également. Donc, entre autres, vous pouvez y trouver les PowerPoint, donc les présentations PowerPoint. Donc, celui de Cathy s'y trouve déjà, par exemple. Donc, ça, c'est dans la section matériel et résumé. Donc, vous pouvez avoir accès au PowerPoint. Alors, si vous ne voyez pas les PowerPoint qui apparaissent déjà, ne vous inquiétez pas, ils vont être ajoutés bientôt. Également, comme ça a été mentionné, donc toutes les séances sont enregistrées, donc elles vont être disponibles en rediffusion donc sur la plateforme également. Donc, seules les personnes inscrites vont pouvoir avoir accès aux vidéos. Pour accéder à ces vidéos-là, donc tout simplement, retournez voir le lien de la conférence et là, lorsque la vidéo sera prête, il sera remplacé par le lien de la vidéo. Donc, c'est la façon pour accéder aux rediffusions. Également, comme je l'ai dit en début de séance, donc, dans le cadre de ce symposium-là, on recherche beaucoup l'interaction. Et je pense que c'est intéressant aussi de pouvoir se former des contacts. Donc, la plateforme permet de de visualiser l'ensemble des participants qui participent au symposium. Donc, si vous êtes curieux et si vous voulez entamer des conversations avec certaines personnes, je vous invite à aller consulter la liste des participants. Également, une autre fonctionnalité qui nous permet d'être interactif. Donc, nous avons un tableau blanc. Donc, si on pouvait remettre le lien dans le chat en ce moment. Donc, ce tableau blanc, il est pour vous. Donc, remplissez-le. Il est là pour être alimenté par vos réflexions. Donc, vous verrez, vous pouvez ajouter vos réflexions, vos idées sur le tableau blanc. Donc, s'il y a des choses que vous avez retenues, des conférences, vous pouvez les noter là aussi. Donc, c'est vraiment un lieu de partage. Et ce tableau blanc-là va être utilisé à la fin, à la toute fin. On va récupérer ce que vous y avez déposé pour l'atelier collaboratif qui va avoir lieu le 3 juin à 11 h. Donc, vous êtes tous invités à cet atelier à partager, à poursuivre toutes les réflexions qui n'ont pas été, alors soit qui n'ont pas été répondues ou pour pousser un peu plus loin les réflexions qui ont été abordées pendant le symposium. Donc, on vous invite vraiment à utiliser ce tableau blanc pour pouvoir y déposer vos idées. Et alors ça, ce tableau blanc-là, donc là, on met le lien dans le chat, mais vous le retrouverez également sur la plateforme dans la section « Comment ça marche ». Alors, j'ai parlé d'ateliers. Donc, les ateliers, vous devez nous manifester votre intérêt à participer. Comme ça va nous permettre d'optimiser votre expérience dans l'atelier, donc en prévoyant le nombre de participants. Donc, également, le lien se trouve dans la section « Comment ça marche ». Si quelqu'un est assez rapide pour le mettre dans le chat, on va le retrouver également dans le chat. Et dernière chose, peut-être que vous l'avez aperçu, mais que vous n'avez pas osé rentrer dedans, nous avons un lobby, donc une petite salle qui nous permet en fait, une autre réunion Zoom qui nous permet d'aller s'isoler ou en tout cas aller dans une autre salle pour discuter en plus petits groupes. Donc, je vous encourage beaucoup à faire ça. Donc, là, j'ai dépassé de 2 minutes. Donc, là, ça va être la pause. On va avoir 30 minutes de pause. Donc, on va reprendre à 11 h. Donc, là, on va fermer cette session-ci. Et pour poursuivre avec les autres sessions, donc, il va falloir aller retourner dans l'horaire de la plateforme et aller cliquer sur le lien de la conférence que vous choisissez de suivre. Donc, c'est la pause. Rendez-vous à 11 h et je vous encourage beaucoup à aller visiter notre lobby et pour discuter, poursuivre les conversations qui ont été entamées et rencontrer aussi les autres participants. Donc, encore une fois, merci beaucoup d'être là et on se revoit dans une vingtaine de minutes.